In production since 2015, this generation XC90 is one of the oldest luxury car designs you can buy new in America today. But it's never sold better, not just in the United States. Globally, 2024 was the best sales year for the XC90. And they sold more of these around the world than Acura sold MDXs. So is age a virtue, or is there something else going on with the XC90? It does seem like every time I drive an XC90 lately, it's gray and drizzly, but we're going to power through, get to the bottom of the XC90's sales success, and of course talk about how this stacks up against its North American competition. First up is the design. I think it's aged incredibly well, and for me, this is the most attractive entry in this segment. Every time I see one driving down the road, I think to myself, that just looks really good still. But calling the design timeless actually discounts the fact that this is not exactly the same design that launched 10 years ago. The biggest change recently is the front-end design, which launched for 2025 and a half. We get this new asymmetrical grille, which has a similar vibe to some modern BMWs. I think that's a European styling thing there. This is the DRL and the turn signal, of course. Then inside we get the active high beams and full LED lights, no fog lights below because of some of the cooling requirements for the plug-in hybrid system, and then just the relatively upright but not quite boxy general look and design of the XC90. Despite only being offered with 2-liter 4-cylinder engines sitting across the engine bay, the XC90 has an extraordinarily long and very upright hood that really gives this the look and the presence that you'd expect in a big luxury vehicle. But it also helped Volvo package a full 4-corner air suspension. This was the first Volvo to offer that feature, and we have double wishbone suspensions up front in every XC90, something you don't find in the majority of the competition that's not from Europe. But like the BMW X5 and the GLE, we have that long hood proportion, a longer dashboard to axle ratio, really helping with that timeless, elegant look. We also have a very upright roof and a relatively vertical hatch, although it has been raked a bit forward versus Volvos of the past. At 195 inches from tip to tail, this is about 3 inches shorter than an MDX, but the biggest difference is really just the bumper overhangs, because on the inside we find very similar dimensions. If you're looking for something bigger though, those bigger options do exist in the form of the Lexus TX especially, or a BMW X7 or Mercedes-Benz GLS, but most of those will cost significantly more than this, including comparably equipped Lexus models. Since the metal body hasn't changed much over time, where all the metal panels come together, we don't see much change either. The taillights are new, of course. They're not too different from before, and the same general shape is there because it's dictated by the way the hatch and the body all come together. We don't have any visible exhaust tips down below because Volvo wants to harmonize the look of all their vehicles, so everything kind of looks like an EV with that more clean underbody look and that clean lower bumper design. Every XC90 in America will have a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo and some form of hybridization under the hood. There are 3 different tunes. B5 gets you 247 horsepower, B6 gets you 295 horsepower, T8 is the plug-in hybrid, giving you 455 horsepower, 532 pound-feet of torque. This is a very different kind of hybrid system than we used to see in the luxury segment back in 2016. Now, it has received significant changes over that span. 2 different engines, 4 different batteries, and a reworked transmission. We've also got new motors in the back, and of course new motors in that transmission case as well. That's how power's gone from just over 400 horsepower up to 455 horsepower in the last 10 years, and range has steadily increased up to 32 miles when the battery is fully charged. Fuel economy, basically the same, 27 miles per gallon combined once that battery has been exhausted. But the way this hybrid system works is very different, especially versus hybrids back in 2016. Lexus has played a little bit of catch-up with some of their new hybrid systems, the Hybrid Max systems, where they combine a stepped automatic transmission and some electric motors, like we find under this hood, interestingly enough. But the plug-in hybrid design is really the key to this XC90 T8's success, because the rear motor is rated for 143 horsepower, 228 pound-feet of torque. Because the rear motor provides so much torque and the battery is a pretty healthy 18.8 kilowatt hours, this can hill climb and it can drive on the freeway in electric-only operation. And in that mode, it's rear-wheel drive. If you need all-wheel drive or you need more power, the engine will kick on and augment things up to 455 horsepower. But we should talk more about that rear electric motor, because a lot of hybrids with E-axles in the back don't feel quite right on gravel, on snow, on ice, etc. But this plug-in hybrid system is different, and that probably has to do with Sweden's geography and the fact that Sweden has a large network of gravel and unpaved road surfaces where they wanted to make sure the XC90 was still perfectly capable on. The battery is the key. When we take a look at most vehicles with e-axles in the back that are not electric vehicles, they have pretty small batteries. So think of Toyota and Lexus's Hybrid Max system. It's a regular hybrid, not a plug-in hybrid, so pretty small battery, about 1/20th the size of this battery in terms of usable capacity. And that means that battery cannot deliver as much power to the rear motor as this battery can. Volvo makes sure that a decent portion of that battery is in reserve to operate in hybrid mode, so in hybrid mode, you can still get 286 horsepower total, 456 pound-feet of torque total, split 50-50 between the front and rear axle. And because that battery is so big, it can send over 140 horsepower to the rear axle whenever it wants to without the engine doing any heavy lifting. And that's what's different about this hybrid system versus, say, the regular hybrid system that we find in a Lexus RX or even some of the other Lexus models. In those vehicles, if they want to send power to their rear motor, first, it's a much less powerful motor than we have here. Second, the engine has to do the heavy lifting because they don't have a big battery to pull from. The plug-in hybrids operate a little bit better, but they still have a small motor in the back. Here, again, you can do 140 horsepower in the rear without the engine spinning up. And here's why that's important. If you're on ice or on snow or some other situation like sand where you might sink in with the front tires, in those Lexus hybrids, to get power to the back, the front tires have to start spinning up because the engine can't generate power without those tires spinning in the front. So you get the front tires spinning, then you get some extra power to the back. This vehicle, especially if you put it in its all-wheel drive mode, does not feel like that at all because the car's computer is going to deliberately balance power out front and rear 50-50 for as long as possible. Charging still happens behind door number 6, just in front of the driver's door, where we find a J1772 connector, but sadly still the same onboard charger as before. It's rated for 3.6 kilowatts in the US because it's a single-phase charger rather than the two-phase charger that you find in Europe. So in the US, it's going to take 5 hours to charge this from 0 to completely full. In Europe, it would do that in about half the time. I am sad that Volvo has not updated the onboard charger or offered DC charging because intriguingly, we do see an increasing number of plug-in hybrids from Europe offering quick charge capability. As you'd expect from Volvo, the front seats are very comfortable, but I'm going to give these 9 out of 10 points because you do find more comfortable seats in some of the German competition, although generally they'll cost more. But more of an issue for me is that we don't have a powered tilt telescopic steering column, so obviously it's not memory linked. And as a family vehicle, if multiple people are driving the car and they're different heights and they like steering wheels in different positions, it's just not memory linked with the 3 position there for the seat. And everything else here is done so nicely, it just seems like an odd omission when we do find powered tilt telescopic columns in ever increasing numbers in the mainstream segment. In the back seat, we definitely find a ton of room. Let me just detach this base station so I can show you sitting there behind myself and move that up to the front and talk about that in a little bit. At 6 feet tall, I have plenty of room back here. As you can see, maybe about 8 or 9 inches or so of legroom. Definitely a lot of headroom as well. You will find more headroom in some of the competition, but honestly, this is a pretty roomy place to be, as long as you don't need to sit in the middle. And this is specific to the plug-in hybrid. The battery pack is mostly there between the driver and front passenger seats, but there is a tiny portion of that battery and the electronic cables, etc., that occupy a little bit of this footwell area back here. So the center seat position is a little bit more limited. It's certainly going to be harder to put some of those load legs with base stations, child seat base stations, right like that here in the middle. On the other hand, there are a bunch of features that I like. I should point out that ambient lighting right there while we're here. But back to the features, we have a 40-20-40 sliding, folding, and reclining seat back in the second row. Also, we have an integrated child seat booster cushion right there. So once your kids are old enough, you can put them in that integrated booster seat without having a separate booster seat around. Shoulder belt comes right here out of the seat back, so it's really easy to line those child seats right there in the middle. Even if your kid is forward facing, rear facing, etc., and you want to use the shoulder belt to belt that seat in, that's going to be kind of easy because it's going to get that kid in the center of the action, of course, a little bit closer to folks up front. Now, the second row slides forward and backward, again, reclines. The latch anchors in the outboard seating positions are easy to find, but I would love to see some latch or ISOFIX anchors for that center seat position right there. The armrest, that pops out, kind of an eccentric little hinge location there. And then we have these fold-out cup holders that honestly are not overly useful. Getting into the mother-in-law row is pretty easy, but you'll notice that you cannot leave a child seat latch anchored into place because the seat back cushion does articulate a little bit versus that seat bottom cushion, precluding you from keeping it in place. Also, you're going to have to lift up that third row from the second row because you'll notice there are no tethers or any pulls or power mechanisms to help you get that third row back up easily from the rear. That's not too surprising, of course, given its status as more of an emergency use third row than a regular use third row, but let's get back here. Anyway, I'll tilt that middle seat forward so you can see what's going on. Go ahead and close that door, pop that headrest back into position. And back here, my head is definitely digging into the ceiling. I would have to put it off to one side in order to sit back here, but that's actually kind of normal in this segment. We have basically the same kind of third row dimensions that we find in the Acura MDX. If you want more room, you don't have too many options. The third row in the Infiniti and the Cadillac, they're not that much roomier. Also, in the BMW X5 and Mercedes-Benz GLE with the available third row, those are teeny tiny, not to mention the Genesis GV80. If you want something big in the back, the Lexus TX is bigger in the back. It's not necessarily more comfortable, but it is roomier in the back. And then of course we have that Buick Enclave with an absolutely enormous third row. It's not just serving sizes that are smaller in Europe, cargo areas tend to be a little more compact as well. Behind this power hatch, we find 11.2 cubic feet of storage space versus 16.3 in the MDX. A little bit of that MDX's length does go to an increased cargo area. Of course, if you want something really big and accommodating, you should look at that Buick Enclave as a competitor. Its cargo area is absolutely enormous. We were able to fit two 24-inch roller bags back here in our roller bag test, 8 if you fold down the third row seats. And to be honest, most XC90s are probably going to live with the third row folded most of the time. These are just as emergency of a third row seat as we find in that MDX, and Acura actually did admit at one point in time that in the US, most MDX shoppers keep those rear seats folded. It should be no surprise that the closest competitor to the MDX in the US, even though this is the second bestseller, is often considered the Lexus RX, which is two-row only, because this can be operated as a two-row SUV with lots of storage room in the back. Now, since it has decided to rain in earnest, it's probably time to check out the interior. And of course, as soon as I step inside, the rain slows down. Up here on the ceiling, we find controls for the panoramic moonroof. We have a slider right there for the power shade and the power glass. Rear view mirror right there, auto dimming, of course. Sun visors that do not extend or have any sort of slide out. That is one big omission that I would love to see Volvo address in a future XC90. That big panoramic moonroof is quite large and it extends to just about the second row passengers' heads. Up here you can see we have grab handles for all 4 seating positions to help you get in and out. And that little slot in front of that grab handle, that's to dock cargo management accessories, so to help keep things like pets and cargo and things like that in the back. I really love the practical cargo solutions that Volvo puts in all their vehicles. Maybe we'll take a look at that in just a second. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, fixed height head restraints in all seating positions here. One cool thing is that Volvo is trying to bring back other materials. So this is actually a fabric interior in a luxury vehicle, something that we haven't seen in the US for a while. It's kind of a navy blue and it has a interesting herringbone texture to it going on there. Little Swedish flag right there in the corner, kind of a cute accessory. This seat is not as adjustable as the top-end seats. You don't have the massage functionality in this one, for instance, but we still have the power extending thigh cushion down here and that pretty attractive general seat design. Also, definitely a lot of attention to detail and materials quality. So more soft touch materials than we find especially in the Infiniti in this segment. Soft touch all in that lower section of the door there, including that bottle holder. Kind of has a rubbery soft coating over that plastic. More fabric, more imitation leather there, lots and lots of real wood trim. I think that Volvo has done a really good job with their real wood lately. And intriguingly, Lexus has actually been backing away from real wood in a lot of their interiors. Metal speaker grills there for the optional Bowers & Wilkins audio system. That is a really expensive option, but I think it's worth it. More fabric on the dashboard, but different fabric than the seats. This is a charcoal fabric insert, more wood, sort of a faux metal line right there. And then the glove compartment, it's a digital control right there. Decently sized bin-style glove compartment. I was barely able to fit an 11-inch iPad inside. And speaking of iPad, we have kind of a big one stapled to the dashboard here. This is the big change on the inside versus the previous model. Not only the screen, but the software that is running the screen as well. So this has been harmonized with the rest of the Volvo lineup. Although intriguingly, ES90 is actually getting a yet next generation system, apparently for its refresh, well, not quite refresh, but new battery, new infotainment for 2026 in that model. This is still running the previous model. Of course, as you can see, we have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto there. We have a native Google interface in the system with the Google interface and Google Assistant there. The big change here is to some of the vehicle's controls. We don't have quite as much control over the vehicle and systems as before. So for instance, even though we have an adaptive air suspension in here, we don't really have a way to change that adaptive air suspension system as directly as before. If we click over here to drive modes, you'll see this drive mode pop up. We get power, pure, off-road, all-wheel drive, etc. If we engage the off-road mode, it is going to increase the air suspension ride height, but you can't just do that yourself at any moment you want to. We have battery usage options here. You can hold the battery, you can charge the battery. We have steering feel, and then we have creep here because we do have a one-pedal drive mode. That's enabled via the shifter down here. But before we get to that, let's take a look at this speaker grille up front. Kind of a elegant, not quite as fun design as we find in some Audis with those pop-up speakers, etc. But I think it's a really well-done dashboard. Head-up display over there on the driver's side, and of course a stitched upper cover of the dash. This one in this model is not leather, it's imitation leather. Now moving down here, we find some physical controls for the infotainment system. Nothing's changed there. Track forward, backward, volume knob right there. They moved the Qi wireless charging mat to over there, and they've reshaped the center console just a little bit. We still have the orifice crystal shifter there, park right there, toggle for engine start stop, auto brake hold right over there. This roller cover covers some redesigned cup holders. They're a little bit bigger and a little bit better for North American drinks. But because of where the battery is located, it's actually right here in this area in the middle of the vehicle, we still have a somewhat small center console storage area. But that doesn't prevent the 4-zone automatic climate control from happening back here with vents in the center console and on the doors as well. The battery, as I said, it's located in what looks like a big transmission tunnel. I think this was really a marvel of engineering for Volvo to do it this way because they designed the structure of the vehicle from the start for this battery location. So you don't lose any space in the cargo area in the back, and it shifts a little bit of the weight rearward in the vehicle. Thanks to the battery and the new electric motor, we actually have a near 50-50 weight balance in this XC90. Moving over to the dashboard here for the driver, we find a redone LCD instrument cluster. Still not as configurable as I would like, but it does offer not just Google mapping, but also two-screen CarPlay. So if I were to enable CarPlay navigation, I would actually get Apple Maps right there in the middle. Steering wheel design is pretty similar to before, no paddles or anything like that on the back. I would love to see that. We have our cruise control controls over here, controls for that multifunction LCD cluster, as well as infotainment over here on this side. And basically the only option we have is to pull up and down our trip computer right there. All right, let's get this hybrid out on the road. You'll notice that in pure mode, I can put my foot almost all the way down on the accelerator pedal and I will stay in EV only operation. And eventually I'll hit 60 miles an hour. I actually just hit 60 miles an hour right there. And you can climb hills, drive on the open highway, 70, 75 miles an hour, no problem in EV only operation. That may surprise some folks because in the back we only have 143 horsepower, but importantly we have over 200 pound-feet of torque in the back, and that's what helps get this up and over the hills in electric only operation. Of course, if you want to go 0 to 60 faster, you just floor it all the way because there's actually a kick down detent in the accelerator pedal, or you just press one of these hybrid options right here in the drive mode selector. All-wheel drive, power, or hybrid, 0 to 60 will be the same in all of those. 4.75 seconds, 0 to 60, even starting with the engine off. Now, that is definitely faster than before, but the bigger improvement is actually over about 30 miles an hour. So if I put this, for instance, in the hybrid mode, engine's off right now, over about 30 miles an hour, we really get that oomph. I think that's mainly because the engine has lost its supercharger. Previously, it had a turbo, a supercharger, and the two electric motors, one in the transmission case and one in the back. It lost the supercharger because the motor got bigger, and we still get more power, but the torque curve changed a bit on the engine. And that, I think, is why in the quarter mile, this is more than a half second faster to the quarter mile, but 0 to 60, it's only 1 to 2/10 of a second improvement over the previous generation system. Refinement is the area where you'll notice the biggest difference between this and previous generations of this system. If I floor it, there's a little bit of a delay. It feels kind of like a transmission downshift, and then you get all 455 horsepower. The engine has to turn on, of course, but in the meantime, thanks to the big battery pack right next to me, we're getting maximum power from the motor in the back. The motor up front is starting the engine, helping things off, smooth out shifts, etc., and off you go. The refinement also goes down to gear shifts and gear selection because they're really smooth. It's almost CVT-like in a way, the seamless transition between gears. You can feel a little bit of a surge, and of course you can hear the engine note change as the gears change in the transmission. But because during a gear change, this system can still deliver 200 pound-feet of torque to the rear, you don't get those more defined shifts that you certainly find in some vehicles, like the Lexus Hybrid Max system, because most of the power is coming from the engine. It has a much smaller battery, so it cannot torque fill between gear shifts like this system can. This feels very, very different in that way. And certainly sportier in many ways. But before we get to that, let's just pop the 6-0 stopping distance up there, 118 feet in this model, bearing in mind this has the widest tires available. Now, when it comes to handling, this is tricky, and I'm going to give the XC90 a B, because this is competing in a segment where we have true rear-wheel drive vehicles like the BMW and Mercedes lineup, etc., and also some really great handling competition like the Acura MDX Type S with its super handling all-wheel drive system. This is a bit different. This is weird because we have a lot of power on the back, but a lot of power up front as well. It's raining, so I'm not going to drive too crazy here, but in this corner, if you start to push it a little bit, you'll feel sort of neutral handling. We have a near 50-50 weight balance here. It's actually 51-49, so pretty balanced as far as that goes, but a lot of curb weight. Decent grip, little bit of torque steer though, and that's the interesting part here. Remember, we have 295 horsepower on the front axle, so if I floor it, you do get sometimes a little bit of front wheel peel, depending on the mode that we're in. Especially, for instance, in a slight corner here like this, if I were to stop, floor it, yep, you get a little bit of front wheel peel, slight bit of torque steer. But in a corner, especially if you're in that power mode, depending on the conditions, you can also get just a little bit of tail kicking out because this can actually send more torque and more horsepower to the rear when it wants to for that particular feel. This is the kind of vehicle where, oddly enough, you can get oversteer and torque steer at the same time. Just go to a slippery surface like a parking lot that's nice and open, crank the wheel to one side, floor it, see what I mean. It's a really interesting combo of things. But for sure-footedness, we can also put the system in the all-wheel drive mode where it's going to turn on the engine regardless of the state of charge and balance that power out front and rear 50-50 as much as possible. If you want the best ride quality in the XC90, clearly you have to get the adaptive air suspension. This is not floaty-boaty, but it is certainly more compliant than the regular steel spring suspension, although I think both are really well tuned. The important thing to remember is that as far as suspension and steering tuning go, Volvo definitely marches to their own drummer. They're not trying to be BMW or Mercedes, and they're not trying to be Cadillac or Buick either. They are off in their own little category. So the suspension, it definitely can feel a little bit brittle at times compared to some of the European options, which I do think are a little bit more polished, the BMW and the Mercedes, although generally admittedly more expensive. But this feels better put together than the suspension that we see in the Acura MDX or the Lexus TX especially. This air suspension soaks up the bigger bumps like potholes and speed bumps really well, but it does tend to transmit some of those smaller imperfections into the cabin in a way that some of the German air suspensions don't. Although with bigger potholes like this one that we're going to roll through here, it does a really good job of staying composed and not transmitting that big bump into the cabin. Out on paved road surfaces where you're logically going to spend most of your time, the balance and the poise really come into play. The double wishbone suspension doesn't become upset over broken pavement. Even in the corners, this stays really flat, really nice and level. Although it's not going to be as firm, as sporty as, again, some of those BMWs or Mercedes. Cabin quietness is another area where Volvo has really refined the XC90 over time. We measured 60.7 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, putting this in direct competition to the comparably priced BMW and Mercedes models. There are a few options in this segment that are quieter. I do think that the Genesis is really quiet inside, but by and large, it's pretty similar. Most of the noise we get in here is tire noise from those big meaty tires, and we do have pretty big tires in here. That's something to keep in mind if you want to compare this to a Lexus RX or some of the competition that's a little bit smaller. It's important to remember the tire size when comparing this against especially some of the Japanese competition that definitely has narrower tires, smaller tire footprints on the road, and therefore a little bit less noise generated by those tires. But we also see refinement in the engine exhaust note. So again, if I go back to pure mode here, we'll just romp on this from a standstill. It's still undeniably a 4-cylinder engine noise, but it doesn't sound as gruff and as unrefined as the XC90 did when it first launched. That was a common complaint. Volvo has added lots of sound deadening, not just in the cabin, but in the engine compartment to try and address that as well. This again is also a slightly different engine because it doesn't have that supercharger under the hood, and maybe there's a little bit less noise from things like that going on. Fortunately, what this gains in refinement, it does not lose in efficiency. Even though we have a bigger battery pack and a more powerful motor in the back, the curb weight's about the same as before, and that's because the engine is a little bit lighter up front to compensate. So far this week, we averaged 29.5 miles per gallon driving this just as a hybrid without charging it at all. That is pretty efficient given the 455 horsepower. And if you compare this to regular hybrids in the competitive set, mostly the Japanese obviously there, you will notice that fuel economy is really similar for a whole lot more performance and a whole lot more power, and a decent amount more refinement and handling ability, etc. Of course, we have the plug-in hybrid capability here as well, and if I were to use that on my daily commute, I would only be using maybe a gallon every 2 to 3 weeks, because this would only turn on the gasoline engine right as I'm getting to the office, right as I'm getting home. Almost my entire commute would be on electricity. So as far as the trip computer was concerned, I was averaging something like 500 something miles per gallon. Obviously that's treating the gasoline as if it were free, but the key thing here is the luxury of not having to visit the gas station on a regular basis, as long as you have somewhere to plug this in. Even if I were only plugging this in at home or just at the office, not in both places, I would be able to stretch out my fill-ups to once every 3-4 months. And for me at least, that's the beauty of the plug-in hybrid. It's that convenience of not having to visit the gas station when I don't want to. You just plug it in at home, reduce your operating costs, and importantly, just don't visit the gas station as often. Out on the road, here's the bottom line. Volvo has always marched to a different drummer, and even though they've continually refined the XC90, it's obvious they didn't want this to drive like a BMW or a Mercedes. Volvo has their vision of what they want their vehicles to do and be and feel like, and I actually find that refreshing because so many car companies are chasing a specific vision of what a car needs to handle like and feel like and steer like out on the road. And Volvo said, you know what, we're just going to do our own thing. It's going to be rear wheel drive when it's electric, it's going to be front wheel drive when it's gasoline, it's going to be all wheel drive when it's hybrid, or all wheel drive when we command it with that button. We decided that we're not going to put independent drive modes and adjust the suspension in 3 or 4 different levels. It's going to be just tied to those drive modes in the system. So if you do want a sportier feel with the suspension, you can put this in the power mode and it's going to firm things up. If you want greater clearance, you put it in the off-road mode, it's going to raise things up. Interestingly, if you put it in the all-wheel drive mode, it's also going to go up just a smidge, but not too much. Now let's dive into pricing, because I think that's where Volvo has done a really good job with the XC90. Although, unfortunately for the plug-in hybrid, there is no longer a tax advantage on leases. And that's one of the reasons that XC90 plug-in hybrid leases were so attractive, was that they all got a tax credit. That is now gone, something that's been, I think, a little bit less widely reported than the EV tax credit on purchases. It was always there on leases for vehicles like this, and now it is not, making them definitely more expensive than before. And speaking of more expensive, the XC90 is generally priced above the Acura MDX, but you also get a more premium vehicle, you get all-wheel drive standard, you get nicer audio systems, etc. So I think the price tag is well done, but know that it is going to generally be a little bit more than that Acura. I think the reason the MDX sells well is that it's pretty fun to drive, it's well priced, you get an extra row for the price of a Lexus RX. Long in history, the RX and the MDX have been the two most cross-shopped options in the luxury segment, but remember that the RX is 2-row, MDX is 3-row. And that's logically because XC90, MDX, they're both likely to only have the second row used on a regular basis. By the time we get up to the Lexus TX, maybe that's a more occasional use third row. When you get up to an Escalade, that's sort of the all-the-time use third row, as long as you don't have any luggage in the back, of course, but it is logical that you could also include some 2-row options in these conversations. Now, back to the MDX. Interestingly, even though we have a standard V6 and we have a turbocharged V6, it's not actually quicker than the Volvo. The T6 XC90, which is the best corollary to the base engine that we find in the MDX, is going to be right around the same 0 to 60, and the T8 is definitely quicker than the Type S. I've been a little bit critical about Acura's Type S now and then, mainly on the performance front of things, the acceleration, and it's pretty logical. It has to limit torque pretty dramatically in the lower gears, it seems, and the engine is not as torquey as you might think because a traditional transaxle like we find in the MDX just can't handle that much power. It can't handle that much power in the Volvo either, which is why in the plug-in hybrid model, to get to 455 horsepower, all that extra power and torque is happening in the back. And that is what gives it the interesting dynamic that we see in the XC90. Interesting, yes. Fun, yes. But generally not as polished or as good, quote unquote, as the dynamics in the MDX. The MDX with that torque vectoring rear axle is definitely a lot of fun. But it's not any bigger in the back, so don't think that the MDX is really going to be that much roomier than the XC90. It's also certainly not more premium feeling than the XC90, both in terms of its interior and exterior design. I think the Volvo just comes across as really classy, chic, and just unfussy. There is something peculiar. I love buttons, mind you, but there is something peculiar about the way the buttons are arranged in the MDX that has never been quite my cup of tea. Also, the Volvo has generally been performing a little bit better in a lot of international and US crash test results, even though it is on the old side of things. And that certainly applies with our next competitor as well, the Lexus TX. I was kind of shocked, as I think a lot of people were, that the Lexus TX did not ace the crash tests for the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety when it came out. There are a few key categories where it got acceptable, one level below the top ranking, and the, at this point in time, quite old XC90 just continues to fly through with great colors there. The 2.4 liter engine in the Lexus TX is gruff. Also, I have to say I've been a little bit disappointed by this. 2.4 liter engine is a little bit gruff. The mid-level hybrid system is not well polished. The plug-in hybrid system is fantastic. It's the traditional Lexus hybrid system with a V6, the planetary power split system, and some batteries. I think that is a fantastic combo. Unfortunately, it's also $80,000, and that is a bit of a bummer. The other bummer, though, for me is the styling of the TX. I think the outside is fantastic, but the inside, the colors are kind of drab. It's a little on the plain side. And oddly enough, Lexus is going in a different direction with their styling interior styling, where they aren't doing real wood. And that's something that Lexus has long been known for. Acres of fantastic wood on the inside, going all the way back to the original LS. But now they're steering away from that. TX and GX and other models are having something that looks kind of like wood, kind of, sort of, but it's really just hard black plastic. And that just fills me with a bit of sadness. Now, the mid-level hybrid system, that's the one I would also avoid because the level of polish is just not there. Design-wise, it's actually very similar to the one we see in the Volvo, only it's missing 2 gears. Now let's go to an American alternative, the Lincoln Aviator. I like the style both inside and out, but it is not the modern Lincoln style. It doesn't get the new dashboard setup that we find in the Lincoln Navigator or in the Lincoln Nautilus, the smaller and larger SUVs in the Lincoln lineup. So it's still stuck with 2 smaller screens in the dash rather than that enormous expansive screen setup. I think that's a bit of a pity, but I do like the fact that it has the turbocharged engine standard. It has a solid rear wheel drive dynamic, so dynamically it's more like a BMW or a Mercedes than even an Audi would be in this segment. The 10-speed is pretty smooth, but there have been some issues with the 10-speed that are starting to crop up, so maybe watch that one. I love the fact that it gets Blue Cruise as well. That is pretty unique in this segment because we don't have really any other hands-free tech other than Super Cruise, but the General Motors option in this segment is not the Cadillac XT6 that's sailing off into the sunset. It is now going to be the Vistic, which is a full EV, and I'm not sure that's the same sort of thing. I'm not sure anybody's cross-shopping Vistic with this particular group. But they're absolutely shopping an Audi Q7. If you want an SUV from Germany in this segment, that is going to be the one. And it doesn't sell as well as the Volvo or the Acura. And I think it's easy to see why when you really scratch the surface. The Q7 does not necessarily handle better than the Volvo. It handles well, mind you, but not necessarily better if we're talking about competitively priced options. And that is part of the problem. It does get pretty spendy. The base engine is not overly powerful. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, pretty similar power output to what we find in the Volvo. We then get a 3-liter V6, which is, I think, the sweet spot in the Q7 lineup. The performance is solid with that. It's nice and smooth. It fits the character of the vehicle. Not quite as well as the 4-liter V8 that's available in the SQ7, of course, but that is really, really expensive. And that's the main thing about the Q7. Things get really expensive really fast. So it's easy to see why the XC90 outsells it, because it's less expensive. And that really applies to the BMW and the Mercedes options in this segment as well, that we're not really going to talk about because they're so much more expensive by the time you've added really any options at all. They're tens of thousands more than in the XC90. So bottom line, the XC90 is still just a really, really easy to live with luxury family vehicle. Now, let me know what you think about that luxury comment down there in the comment section, because Volvo has long been in a weird blended world where it's not Buick, but it's not Mercedes either. And by no means has Volvo climbed up to a Mercedes or a BMW level, but I think that a lot of folks in the luxury segment, that actual people that are shopping here, either see them as some part of that group, but not quite in the full club. And let me put it this way. To me, if you go to the country club in your Volvo XC90 and you've just had kids and you came out of a 5 Series, everybody at the country club's going to think that's totally normal. There's nothing weird about that. But if you go from a 550 to an Acura MDX and you drive that to the country club with your kids in it, they're going to go, whoa, hang on a second. Did something happen? Are they downsizing at the company? Like, what's going on? It's that vibe and that presence that you see brand-wise. I think that's part of where Volvo fits in this little puzzle. It's not a full member of the club, but it's not as weird as if it was club adjacent. Also, kind of classically, the Volvo's the one you send the nanny in to take your kids to school. Anyway, let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section, and we'll see all of you next week.